This is the true story of Libby Squire, a kind and determined young woman, someone that had fought hard to build a new life for herself and was finally settling into truly being her. But after a night out that never even got started, a plethora of witnesses and CCTV, how exactly did Libby simply vanish? Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to CASE Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing, incredibly supportive CASE family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Remember, choosing to be kind can save a life in many ways. Thank you so much for choosing to be here with me. Our love and respect goes out to those that knew and loved Libby and all those affected by this case. Libby Squire was born on the 1st of January 1998. She grew up in a small village in Buckinghamshire in England. She was a doting big sister to her brother and two sisters, and she was very close to her mother Lisa and father Russell. The small town girl was wickedly funny, witty, and known for her kind nature. She had always been intelligent and pushed herself hard to do well in school, but she also held herself to an impossibly high standard. Her mental health soon started to suffer, and before she knew what was happening, she was battling an eating disorder, and then her grades started slipping too. However, she continued to push through and persevere to get her A-levels. She then took a gap year and went travelling in Paris. By the time she got back, she was more than ready to move into the next phase of her life, university. Her mother Lisa was worried about her daughter being so far away. She did not want her mental health to start suffering again, but Libby knew she was ready for a fresh start at the University of Hull. She was going to study philosophy and was in a great place. Libby was ready for her real life to begin. On January 31st, 2019, Libby, now 21, and her friends were getting ready to paint the town red. They were halfway through their second year at university, and they were celebrating their results from their Christmas assessments. At around 8:30 p.m, Libby left her student accommodation on Wellesley Avenue. She headed with a large group of friends to another student house nearby. A lot of students in the area were going out, and the plan was to pre-drink, play some games, catch up, and then head to the Welly. The Welly was the go-to spot for students in Hull, and this night was no different. At around 10 p.m, she sent her boyfriend Connor a text message. She said goodnight as they were heading out and she was leaving her phone at home. By this point, the pre-drinks were flowing and everyone was in high spirits. The group reached the Welly at around 11:20 p.m, but not everyone made it inside. Libby was drunk. She was actually so drunk that she was struggling to walk, talk, or stand. The security team on the door turned her away, saying she had already had too much to drink. 10 minutes later, her friends put her into a taxi, gave the driver money, and told him to take her back home. They watched as a taxi drove off, knowing their friend was much safer calling it a night before she put herself in danger. Little did they know that this was only the start of Libby Squire's night. Just before 3 a.m, Libby's friends were winding down for the night. After making it home, one of them sent a text message to Libby's housemate to see how she was. They expected to hear that she was hugging the toilet or passed out in bed, but to their alarm, they said Libby had not come home. They hadn't seen or heard from her since she left in a taxi that night. Was she not with you? The housemate asked. Panic started to set in as Libby's friends started to phone around. No one had heard from her. Panic turned to terror when they found her house keys in the garden. Not only was Libby very drunk, it was also bitterly cold outside and snow was covering parts of the road. They knew this just wasn't safe. The police were called and were concerned. They launched an investigation immediately. With Libby's history of mental health issues, they wondered whether this was a cry for help. Her friends and family knew they had to consider every possibility, but this one was highly unlikely. She had been in the best of spirits, she loved her housemates, and had just received great marks and feedback from her exams over Christmas. Within just a few hours, the media was running with the story. Libby was pushed to the forefront of everybody's minds. The police were able to quickly track down the taxi driver that took her home. The driver claimed that he had dropped her at Wellesley Avenue, and when he glanced back, he saw her walking towards her front door. We know now that Libby never went inside, and fortunately CCTV covered the streets. It wasn't hard to track her movements after getting out of the taxi. She was just a stone's throw from her front door. Cameras showed Libby walking along the roadside at 11:37 p.m. She was visibly intoxicated. By 11:40 p.m, she was lying in the snow. Two passers-by stopped to try and help her. They were concerned about the crying young woman laying on the ground. They described her as agitated, incoherent, and when she snapped at the pair that she didn't want any help, they felt that there was nothing that they could do. A group of students then saw her outside their house. They invited her in to check that she was okay, but she instead carried on walking, seemingly aimlessly. And authorities said that given how cold it was early that morning, she could well have been suffering from the early side effects of hypothermia. Libby's best friend Lauren said, "When people go out and they drink, sometimes you lose your phone, or you can't get home quite as easily. But she's always made sure that she's found a phone, or anyone she can contact to make sure someone knows that she's safe, regardless of what had happened. So to not hear anything from her at all is completely not like her." However, Libby was then spotted on CCTV 45 minutes later at the junction with Hayworth Street. A male driver reportedly saw her sitting on a bench and got out to ask if she was okay. She said she was, and he drove away. What happened next remained a mystery. In the days following Libby's disappearance, police said that they were still treating it as a missing persons inquiry. Behind the scenes, detectives began looking at it as an abduction. Police asked residents to check their gardens, sheds, and outbuildings. This was just in case she may have taken shelter there. Door-to-door inquiries were being carried out and bins and drains were being searched. On the road where Libby lived, the search effort was just as thorough. Police officers were hoping to find even the smallest clue to piece together her last known movements. Just as they were beginning to lose hope, police received their first big tip. A resident that lived near Oak Road playing fields said he heard a woman screaming at around midnight. He said that the noise he heard was coming from around the wooded area. It was so loud that it woke him up, and he knew the time was exact because he had checked his phone. He looked out of his window to see a man hurrying towards a car. Using this time frame, police went back and searched through the cameras again, but this time working in reverse order. This narrowed down the search. On the footage, they noticed a silver Vauxhall Astra had been circulating the area for hours before Libby was last seen. It was just driving around and around, seemingly aimless. But just before midnight, this car was seen pulling in at the end of the road, close to where Libby was walking. A person stepped out and crossed the road quickly to follow her. The person then crossed back over and started walking along the other side of the road. It appeared that whoever it was had crossed the road to see who, if anyone, Libby was walking with and gauge what the situation was. They stopped for a minute before crossing back over the road and talking to Libby. 5 minutes passed when the pair were seen walking together, but now in the opposite direction that Libby had been heading in. Libby was on the pavement and the driver was sitting in the car. Authorities saw a few more headlights come and go, but they believed whoever the driver was waiting for the coast to be clear before continuing on. At 12:08 a.m, Libby got inside of whoever's vehicle it was and the car drove off. Her watch was later found in that exact area. The police theorised that there was likely a point where either the driver physically tried to coax her in, or maybe even grabbed her arm to pull her into the car. They now had a description of the car, and going off of what the resident had said, a time frame and a potential location for where the car had ended up with Libby. Sure enough, the car was tracked as it pulled into the Oak Roads playing fields. 10 minutes passed, and this was around the time the residents heard the screams. The car lights then came back on, and the car exited the fields and headed back out onto the streets. 2 women then also came forward with a separate complaint. A complaint that would ultimately turn into a huge lead. They reported that at around 3 a.m, a man had stepped out in front of them on the streets and then started intimately touching himself. They were horrified, but he didn't seem bothered at all, relishing just how uncomfortable he had made them. Using this time, location and description, they found the man in question. Everything matched up, and it was the same man in the same car. They now had a clear image of their person of interest. Following his movements in the hours before and days afterwards, they got a hit on the car's number plate. On February the 6th, the police arrested a 24-year-old man in connection with Libby's disappearance. The man was a married father of 2. His name, Pavel Relevich. He worked as a butcher and moved to the UK from Poland as a teenager. Neighbours described Pavel as a hard-working man who enjoyed the gym, baking and long walks with his young family. He was always friendly, polite and smiling. However, little did anyone know that Pavel would soon rack up a string of crimes. The police had caught a very dangerous individual. Along with being arrested for the suspicion of Libby's abduction, he was also arrested for several offences. Pavel lived close to where Libby was last seen, and to the fields where the screams had come from. After taking a sample of his DNA, it turned out that he was linked to several other crimes, going back almost 2 years. For a long time, Pavel had been breaking into people's homes, peering through windows and following women on the streets. Although fingerprints were often lifted and DNA samples were taken from the houses, Pavel had no criminal record and a match to him was never made. But now they had their man. The police conducted a thorough search of his house and vehicle. Whilst his house turned up nothing, inside his vehicle was a different story. There was dirty underwear, adult toys, used prophylactics, photographs of women clearly taken without their permission, along with various other items that had been stolen from houses. When he was asked about Libby, he denied ever seeing her in his life. But when a CCTV was shown to him, he changed his story, saying he had picked her up that night to help her, calling himself a good Samaritan and offering to take her home. He said he drove her to Oak Fields and then drove off. This wasn't an admission of a crime, but it was enough to place him at the scene. But unfortunately, this still wasn't enough to charge him. The case had come to a standstill. 7 weeks after Libby had gone missing, a fisherman in the Humber estuary found a badly decomposing body floating on the water. Around the neck was a little necklace with the letter L on it. It was Libby. Her condition was so bad that it was not possible to determine the cause of death. It was unconfirmed whether she was already dead when she went into the water or not. The pathologist said that she could have died from asphyxiation or drowning, but they could not be certain. Testing confirmed that Libby had also been violated before being killed. Everyone was devastated. Mother Lisa was even more upset when she found out where Libby had been found. Libby had a huge fear of water and wasn't a strong swimmer. Wondering whether she was alive or not when she went into the river only added to the heartbreak. Police continued to build their case against Pavel. They searched through thousands of hours of footage to solidify his movements on the night that Libby got into his car. CCTV had shown him driving back out to the same location at around 2:30 a.m. in the morning, just 2 hours after he was initially there with Libby. He stayed for a few minutes before heading back into town, which is where he exposed himself to the women on the streets. This was the final piece that they needed. He would have had no reason to go back there unless he was concealing things and covering up evidence. More tests also came back after months of waiting. They showed that Pavel's DNA was on and inside Libby's body. He then changed his story, saying that Libby had essentially thrown herself at him, and the pair had had consensual relations in the field before he left her there. But it was clear that this was not the truth. Detectives finally had enough to charge him. In October 2019, Pavel Relovich was charged with the assault and murder of Libby Squire. As he was read the charges in the police car via a translator, he started to laugh, appearing completely unfazed.
I must tell you that you are under arrest for the murder and rape of Libby Squire in Hull on Friday the 1st of February 2019.
Muszę pana poinformować, że zostaje pan oskarżony w tej chwili za zabójstwo i zgwałcenie Libby Squire dnia 1 lutego 2019 roku w Hull. It's impossible.
To jest niemożliwe. Ja nic nie zrobiłem, to jest 100%.
What I mean is, I haven't done anything. This is
Nigdy bym nie zabił
100%
człowieka.
sure. I would have never killed a human being.
He pleaded not guilty, maintaining his story of a casual, consensual hookup. After delays due to the pandemic, the trial finally began in January of 2021. The prosecution put forward a damning case. They argued that Pavel was a highly dangerous predator, someone whose crimes had escalated to the point where he was willing to do anything to fulfill his perversions. They claimed that he saw women as objects and got a thrill out of frightening them. According to the prosecution, from the second he saw Libby that night, alone, cold, upset and vulnerable, she simply became his target, his prey. They argued that he knew instantly what he was going to do the second she got into his car. They said that if it wasn't Libby, it would have been someone else, sober or intoxicated on that day or another. However, the defense was focused on the less than 10-minute window that he would have had to commit the crime. They argued that his car pulled into the fields at 12:11, and the screams were heard at 12:14, and then he was back out and driving by 12:20. It left a less than 10-minute window for all of this to happen, but the jury felt that this was more than enough time. After deliberating for 5 days, the jury found Pavel guilty on both counts of murder and the assault. He was jailed for life with a minimum term of 27 years. Upon sentencing him, the judge said that Libby did not stand a chance that night. They said that Pavel may never be released, and if he is, he will be monitored for the rest of his days. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? Let me know down in the comments. Please do hit like if you appreciate what I'm doing here. Thank you to everyone in the Dark Case crew. You too can become a channel member for just 99p. A huge thank you to my patrons. Your support makes a massive difference. You too can support my work and be thanked in every video for just $5 per month. So thank you to Rachel David, Kathy Green, David James, Addy Alexander, Karen Jones, El Palmieri, James Harrington, Shane Woodward, Faster River, Stacey Krogerus, Summer Chambers, Mona Corona, Cepheid Variable, Anthony Watson, Jason Coward, Guardian Paler, Jeremy Sebranek, Joy Burton, Dawn Crock, Michelle Mims, Natalie Lundquist, Anita Ford, and Darlene. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.